Great to finally get a chance to have this webinar. So we certainly look forward to a very fruitful conversation about the topic that we have today. Good afternoon and good morning, good evening to you from wherever you're joining us from. I know we have people joining us from all over the world for this important webinar. And we already read from Omar Adamu. He says he's from Ghana, and he is the Executive Director for Center for Muslim Youth in Peace and Development. He's joining us, so he's just sending a message. So Omar, you are very much welcome to today's webinar hosted by the Institute of Certified Chartered Economists. My name is Paul Frimpong. I'm the Global Head of Strategy and Membership with the ICCE. And today I will be your host and moderator as we delve deeper into this very important topic with our special guest, Janet Benson, which I will introduce, of course, in due time. Now, for the benefit of those that are joining us for the first time, of course, we had previous events, webinars in the last couple of weeks, which spans across foreign direct investment. We've spoken about the Africa Continental Future Area. We had a webinar on ESG, which is a big issue in the investment and management services industry. And of course, today we have another yet important topic to discuss. Now, for the benefit of those who are joining for the first time, I will take the next 2-3 minutes to run you through what the ICC is about, the Institute of Certified Chartered Economists, who we are, what we do, and how you can be a member of the ICC and tap into the rewarding opportunities that the ICC qualification can present to you. So without much ado, I will just share my screen. So either you are watching or listening or both, you can make a note of what the ICC is and what we do and how you can be part of us. Thank you. So the ICC basically is the Institute of Certified Chartered Economists, and we are a leading qualification for today and tomorrow's economists. So it's a professional qualification and membership-based one that serves to provide learning and educative opportunities and networking opportunities for individuals that want to pursue a career as economists. So we have various programs that we've run. Some are examinable, others too are accessible for free, just like today's webinar that we are having. Now, the vision of the ICC is to raise professional economists with the highest ethical standard through quality education and collaborative learning. Now, we are very fortunate to have the opportunity to have these distinguished individuals who are part of the leadership of the ICCE. So we have Dr. Frank Luthier, who is a senior partner and CEO of Southbridge Investment, a former World Bank Vice President and a former Vice President of African Development Bank. We have Professor H.K. Pradhan, who is a professor of finance and economics at SLRI, which is a top Indian business school. We have Dr. Mustafa Ibn Buama, Associate Professor of Economics, University of New Brunswick in Canada. We have Dr. Lalima Mukherjee. She is a Professor of Economics, University of Engineering and Management in Calcutta. Dr. M. Azhar Hussain, who is Associate Professor of Economics at Rochdale University in Denmark. And of course, today we are privileged to have Janet Benson also from Denmark. We have Danili Marcia, who is the Chief Economist at Dutch Bank for South Africa and Nigeria and part of Southern African countries. We have Dr. Barun Taka, who is Associate Professor of Economics at Flame University. My very self, Paul Frimpong, as the Global Head of Strategy and Membership, and my colleague, Goresh Lagu, who is the Global Head of Partnership with the ICCE. Now, in terms of membership, as I did mention earlier, the ICC is a membership-based professional body for economists. So obviously, you need to meet certain requirements before you can be part of the ICCE. And for us, the minimum requirement that you must at least be admitted to a bachelor's degree or equivalent. And if you are in your first year, you can, of course, join the ICCE. And it doesn't matter which program you're pursuing, as long as you have a passion to become an economist professional, you can obviously join the ICCE. With PhD, MPhil, MA, MBA, MSc, bachelor's degree or BSc, or there's diploma that you have in any related field, you can be part of the ICC. Now, before we award any certification to our members, they go through a series of examination, which is the ICC exams, and our exams are offered by the computer-based testing, and it's accessible remotely, and it's offered each month of the year, so from January to December, in each month you have the opportunity to take your ICC exams. And the pass mark for our exams is 50%. Now, in terms of curriculum, these are the subject areas that our learners go through. And these will go through this, they take the examination when they pass or before they are awarded as ICC chapter holder. So you have to go through this curriculum, the level 1. We have investment, microeconomics, macroeconomics, financial systems and developments. In the level 2, we have a continuation of some of the papers from level 1. Of course, you have econometrics, you have corporate finance. We have econometrics continuation, we have economic and business ethics, international trade, international finance. So these are the curriculum or the papers that one will have to go through before being awarded as a ICC charter holder. Now, in respect of the ICC, we have a professional specialization gateway. So what it means that once a learner completes the first 3 levels, you have the opportunity to select from any of these specializations, be it financial economics, petroleum economics, energy economics, health economics, managerial economics, and industrial economics, labor economics, marine economics. So a learner has the opportunity to choose from any of these specializations. And then from there, you take 2 papers under such specialization, and then you'll be awarded as maybe a health economist under the ICC charter designation. Now, of course, the applicable fees, one of the key things with the ICC is that it's very accessible in terms of fees and in terms of how you can actually take the program without any restriction, irrespective of where you are located. So with the use of technology, we're able to offer a very accessible and of course, affordable fees for everyone to be able to be part of the ICC. So it starts with a non-refundable registration fee of $210 US. We have annual membership subscription fee of $59 USD. We have re-registration fee of $150 USD. Examination fees are according to the levels. So level 1, level 2, level 3, and professional specialization gateway fees are different. So level 1, you're paying $59 USD per paper. Level 2 is $63 USD per paper. Level 3 is $72 USD per paper. Of course, I will share the link of this information in our chat box here on Zoom, so you can almost always visit these links to have more information for yourself. We offer scholarship opportunities because we know that as a professional organization, our membership ability to be able to access the program is key. So we are offering our learners opportunity to apply for any of our 4 scholarship schemes that are available. So we have what we call the Future Economic Scholarship, which is open to all our learners and registered members. We have the Women Economics Network. So if you're a female and you're part of the ICCE, you will surely definitely be able to apply for this Women Economics Network Scholarship. We have Media Professional Scholarship. So it's open to all media professionals who are involved in business, economics, finance, and investment reporting. And then we have, lastly, a faculty scholarship for any faculty member who is a full-time college or university tutor or heads of departments who teach a minimum number of credit hours in economics at any accredited and recognized institution of higher learning. So if you're a faculty, you also have the chance to tap into our faculty scholarship to pursue the ICC qualification. Now, to be a part of the ICC, all you need to do is to visit our website, www.charteredeconomist.org. Then you can apply there, make the initial registration payment of $210 USD. Your application will be processed, and then you will get a further communication from the ICC on how you can pursue the qualification. So thank you very much for granting me the opportunity to share with you this information. Again, I will put in the links in our chat. So if you have, if you want to visit these pages, you can surely have access to them, and then you can verify the information from yourself. And if this is a fit for you, then surely welcome you to be part of it. So we have Alan here. So Alan is based in Johannesburg in South Africa. So that's where he joined us from to be part of this webinar. So thank you all for being part of it. Now, before we zoom into today's discussion, I will just make some few announcements. So this is going to be very conversational as possible. So the way it's going to work, I'll be introducing our main speaker, who will then take over and present to us her research and her insight for a couple of minutes. And after that, we will give you the opportunity that if you have any questions, you might send them through using the Q&A or the chat box on the Zoom app, whether it's on your any device that you're using to join us. You can find the Q&A button, so you can put in your questions so that our speaker for today will be able to address them. And we really want you to be part of the conversation. So please do make your questions ready. And if you don't have questions ready yet, of course, while she's presenting, you can be picking notes and making your own questions, and you can send them through. And then I will read out these questions to our main speaker so that she will address them for us. So that will be all for the announcement. So once again, I welcome all of you to today's webinar hosted by the Institute of Certified Chartered Economists, the ICCE, which we are going to discuss about economics of religion. Does religion affect economic growth? I don't know if it's the right question to ask, but that's the question to ask anyways. And our speaker today has agreed to share her perspective and insight on this topic for us. Now, before I go on, I'd just like to read a profile of our speaker for today. So Janet Benson, she is an associate professor of economics at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. She's also a CEPR research affiliate in economic history and the macroeconomics and growth program, external research assistant at CAGE Cage at Warwick University, and executive director of the Association of Economists, Religion and Culture. Janet Benson's research focuses on economic approaches to decision making and culture, and includes topics related to religion, economic growth, economic history, and geographic confounders. Most of her recent work is within the economics of religion field. Methodologically, she uses econometric techniques to test theories from psychology, sociology, theology, and anthropology empirically. Her methodology involves broad data set spanning the globe, allowing testing of the generalizability of the various theories. So, ladies and gentlemen, with the utmost honor, let's welcome our speaker for today, Janet Benson, who is going to present to us on economics of religion. Does religion affect economic growth? So Janet, please, you are welcome to take over. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Great. And yes, thank you for inviting me to give this webinar. Yes, I'm an economist and I do mainly economics of religion, and that's what I'll present for you today. And I'll focus mainly on the impact of religion or religiosity on growth, as you have asked for. Good. So just the structure of my talk. So first I'll present briefly the economics of religion field. I'll discuss some the differences between types of religion and religiosity. Then I'll talk about how to measure religiosity and how religiosity has evolved during the past decades. Then I'll discuss briefly what drives religiosity. Could it be income? And last, how does religiosity influence our societies? And this is, so I'm an empirical economist, so it's mainly empirical research where I use theories from other fields and use a lot of data, and then I'll also present other people's work for you. Right, so the economics of religion field, it probably started with the great sociologist Max Weber and his theory of the Protestant ethic. He theorized that the Protestant ethic, there is some cultural ethic in Protestants where Protestants are more hardworking and thrifty. That was his theory, at least. And but at the time that he proposed this theory, there were no econometric tools to test whether the theory could be generalized to society. He just his empirics was he had very little data. He looked at his classmates and saw some correlations. But later on, their econometrics has evolved, and people have then been able to test Weber's ideas. And they have also been able to test various other theories. And so the economics of religion field in general, it uses economic methodology to study the causes and consequences of differences in either types of religion or religiosity. And this economic methodology, it can be either theoretical, using theoretical models, or it can be empirical, using lots of data and econometric techniques. And so when we're saying types of religion, I mean either, for example, comparing Protestants with Catholics, as Weber did, or comparing Christians with Muslims, and so on. But what I'll focus mostly on today is religiosity, which is the degree of believing independent of the type of God people believe in. And I'll motivate why I focus on that. So let me just show you some correlations. So here I've used the World Values Survey and the European Value Study. I can, with these surveys, I have put the share of Protestants in 2000 out the x-axis, and we have the GDP per capita up the y-axis, and we see that there is a positive correlation. So we might say that this is consistent with the Weber's theory, perhaps. We can also look at the share of Muslims. So countries that have more Muslims, they also tend to be poorer on average. Okay, so this is just correlations. There's lots of other things that can influence these factors here. Then we have one measure of religiosity, so the degree of believing, how large a role does God play in your life, I think the question is. And we see that more religious societies, they are also poorer. So right now, this is just correlations, okay? So no causal impact on anything. But what I want you to focus on is the R squared. So how much does these religion variables explain GDP per capita? We see that the share of Protestants explain mainly 4% of the variation in GDP per capita. That's extremely little. We also see that the share of Muslims explain only 13% of the variation in GDP per capita across the globe. But when we look at religiosity, we see that religiosity explains 34% of the variation in GDP per capita, so much higher than the others. This signals to us that maybe the relevant measure of religion is religiosity rather than comparing Muslims to Christians. And this explanatory power here, it's very similar to the correlation between institutional quality and GDP per capita, which has been very dominating in this literature here, and just signaling that religiosity seems quite crucial. And this is why we will proceed in this presentation to focus on religiosity. Now, some challenges here are: how do we measure religiosity? Is that possible at all? Can we compare the religiosity of a Muslim with the religiosity of a Christian? These sorts of things we need to think about. Another challenge is that so I'm kind of talking about this figure here as kind of a causal effect, even though I'm saying that it's just a correlation. Could this figure reflect that there is some impact from income to religiosity? We will discuss that a bit later. And is this really generalizable to the world? We will talk about that. So one measure of religiosity is based on surveys, as the one I just showed you. And here we see a picture of the world, where darker colors means more higher religiosity. This is the share of the population where people find religion to be important in their lives. Yeah, some challenges here. Do surveys capture religiosity well? How precise does these measures have to be? So we know that when we do an econometric analysis, our measures don't have to be precise. There can be lots of noise in them, but they really have to be relatively correct, right? We don't want to have a high measure of religiosity if the person or country is really not religious. Yeah. Some other measures of religiosity in the literature is church attendance, and also Googling of religious terms. I'll get back to that. There's also measures of time use on prayer, and also some recent research that I've been doing on naming patterns. Right, so how has religiosity then evolved? We're getting less and less religious, right? Or are we? So here's a measure of religiosity. How important is religion in your life? And we see that the share of people finding religion important is falling. Up here we see a similar figure just for the US, just to zoom in on one country where there's lots of data on religion, and we see that it's declining more for the younger ages, showing that maybe religion is on the decline. But at the same time, there is religious revivals in the Muslim world and evangelical revivals in Latin America. So these tendencies tend to raise religiosity over time. And so if we look at other measures of religiosity, for example, when we use Google Ngrams, where we see the share of books about prayer, we see that the share of total books in the world produced that contain topics of prayer, they are actually rising lately. Of course, they were falling quite dramatically earlier on, around the end of 1800s. We also see, if we look at Google searches for prayer, so there's research showing that what we do on the internet reflects how what we do in the real world. And so if you Google more religious terms, research shows that then you are probably more religious. Maybe not. Maybe you are a researcher in religion and you Google religion quite a lot, and maybe that doesn't reflect your religiosity. But on average, across very large populations, it is the case that those who Google religious terms more, they are more religious. And we see that the people, the share of Google, the share of total Google searches involving prayer, they are rising over time. So maybe these numbers here, they show rising religiosity. Perhaps religiosity is rising in some parts of the world and falling in others. There's some evidence of that. Okay, so let's move on to what drives religiosity. Could it be income? So if we go back to the figure that I showed you on the negative correlation between GDP and religiosity, if we want to think of that as an effect of income on religiosity, we need first to discuss how income influences religiosity. So let me just give you a brief overview of what is it that makes some societies more religious than others. A model that is used by many people in the field is says that people tend to use religion more intensely or to become religious if there is a higher demand for religion or if there's higher supply of religion. So speaking of demand, so the idea is that religion, so if you were met with stressful events, people tend to use their religion more strongly. I'll show you some evidence of that. And to the supply of religion, so the idea is here that if there are more churches or better quality masses in the churches, maybe it's more attractive to go to church, and more people tend to go to church. Last, there is also religious oppression. So for instance, 100% in Pakistan believe in God, but it turns out that all these people are not necessarily religious, but they are just perhaps afraid that they'll get some kind of punishment if they don't say they are religious. Right, so research so far shows that we don't really see an effect of income on religiosity, but we see that religiosity rises with insecurity, with more churches, and also, so I've done some research on laws in the US, so laws that improve benefits for religious organizations, they tend to, well, raise religiosity in American society. So let me just go a little bit more into detail of some of this research. So I've to investigate whether it is true that people become more religious when they are hit by adversity. I have been looking at earthquakes. So this first map shows earthquakes across the globe. I can then combine that with the surveys of religiosity and see that if an earthquake hit in between two waves of surveys, what happens to religiosity. I can then calculate average religiosity for those areas that were not hit by an earthquake. We see that religiosity does not change at all over time in these areas. Well, over time, this is from 1981 to 2014. We then see that areas that were hit by an earthquake, well, they see a bit more rising religiosity, but even more, but religiosity rises even more in areas that were hit by an earthquake, but that were otherwise rarely hit by earthquakes. So surprising adversity tends to make people use their religion to cope. Another example, you may have thought about that while I speak. So the Corona crisis, I've also investigated, and we see that when the Corona crisis hit, we saw dramatic rises in religiosity, actually. And so this is Google searches. I didn't have any data on actual survey measured religiosity at the time when the Corona crisis hit, when I wrote the paper. And since that I could look again at more measures of Google searches for religion, and we see that throughout 2020, people searched more for religious terms as a share of total Google searches. So of course, internet search volumes increased quite a bit under Corona, where we were all at home, but the share spent on religious terms increased even more. So it seems that people tend to use their religion when hit by crisis. Right? And so to the question, does religiosity fall as societies modernize? As I said, there's really evidence showing both. So of course, back 200-300 years ago, when societies first started to modernize, we see really big declines in religiosity. But when we look at today, the past 50 years or so, we don't really see any declining religiosity when we look at various shocks to income in general. Right, so the last question, how does religiosity influence society? So Paul, when do you want me to end?
No, you may proceed.
Okay. Cool. So the first big chunk of research. So this is by no means my own research. It's all different people in this field of economics of religion. So in the we may all have thought that maybe religion seems to be good for growth because we have maybe Max Weber in our back head and all the early research on this topic. So the thing was that historically, religion probably or most likely seem to have been quite important for the spread of literacy and education. So in the monasteries and so on, people tended to have teachings on religion, of course, but also tended to learn to read and write in the monasteries. So monasteries and missionary work were quite crucial back in the early days of our development. But again, so this is types of religion. So this research here shows that when Christian missions came to various places in Africa, they tended. There is actually a little bit of a dispute about whether the impact of on growth for these local places was positive, but at least education and literacy seems to have been really affected positively by these different missions going into Latin America, Africa, and so on. Right, but the rest will be on religiosity, which seems to have a bit of a more negative effect on education and growth. So there is a study by Mara Squigliarini studying the industrialization in 19th century France. She shows that in areas of France where there is higher religiosity, she can measure this by a creative measure of religiosity. She shows that these areas, they have more Catholic schools. She then also shows that these areas with more Catholic schools, well, the curriculum then in the areas, it was much more focused on religion compared to math and science and these mathematical skills that were crucial for the Industrial Revolution. So we see that these more religious areas here, they were slower to industrialize. Another study on religiosity and science is by Roland Benabou and co-authors. Their idea is that so these sacred texts, they are tied to this fixed worldview, how God created the world. And this worldview often is contradicted by scientific discoveries. For example, Galileo, who was trialed by the Catholic Church. And there is other examples of people that were trialed by the church for having discovered various different things. Roland Benabou and co-authors, they develop a theoretical, so this is a mainly theoretical paper, and they develop a theoretical model that explains how this then can hamper innovation, which is quite logical, right? And here we see that more religious areas of the world, well, they are they have fewer innovations today. Another paper on religiosity and science is by Eric Cheney, who looked at millions of books and shows. So this is a cool map showing how the production of science was actually dominating in the Muslim world in the Middle Ages, but as we know, the production of science was not dominating in the Middle East when we move further forward into history. And what this graph shows here, so the dark curve here is books on science. We see a drastic fall here around 1100 and further on. The other curve here is the share of books on madrasas, which is religious institutions in the Muslim world. And we see that they rise really at the same time as the books on science fall. So his interpretation is that these secular institutions, they were replaced with religious institutions and the production of science fell. There's also evidence that religiosity impacts democracy. And for example, this paper by Mariana Belloc and co-authors, They study Italy in year 1000 to 1300, where there's good data on earthquakes. And at this point in time, these Italian city-states, or some of them, they transitions into democracy. But what happened was that in areas where an earthquake had recently hit, and where the political leader was also the religious leader, well, an earthquake hit, and people started to have religion more central to their lives. They used religion for coping and so on. So the power of the religious leaders rose, and we see that in these areas, it was less likely that they would transition into democracy. That's what this figure here shows. So the interpretation is that we get this increased religious beliefs, we get an increased power to religious leaders, and then the leaders, they don't need to give off their power and emerge into democracy because they are so powerful already, and it's okay, they say, for example, follow my laws because God says so, instead of follow my laws because you elected me. Some last studies on the link between religiosity and democracy. So Eric Cheney, he has another paper, quite cool paper, where he looked at the denial. So in areas with the shocks to denial, so again, a shock increases the power of religious leaders. That's really something that we see a lot in the literature. And we see that when a shock hit, it was less likely that these religious leaders, they would give off their power. In some work that I did, we see that in areas that historically had punishing gods or beliefs in punishing gods, well, they are more likely to have religious laws in their state apparatus today, and they are less democratic. And the interpretation that we give is that religion is this alternative to democracy, and we see these leaders, they use religion to legitimize their power. So some very last research that I will show you before I end, some more positive research. So until now, you see, I've actually only talked about how religion or how religiosity can be bad for the economy, but there's also some very good effects of religiosity. So research has shown that individuals with stronger religious faith, they report higher levels of life satisfaction, or that they are just happier. And they are also less prone for depression. So this study by Miller, it's a medical study, they measure the share of cortisol in the brain, and they find that people who report that they are religious, they actually have less stressful hormones in the brain. Some cool studies by this anthropologist, Psycholatas. He's working in Mauritius, where he measures various different measures of the body of people performing these intense rituals, and he finds that those who engaged in more enduring rituals, they report higher happiness and better health, but their actual physical health did not improve, but their happiness did. Some last results, which are also positive. So there is some experimental work showing that religious individuals, they are more pro-social. So in lots of different experiments, these evolutionary anthropologists, they have found that those who are more religious, well, they give more to charitable giving, they volunteer more, and their more willing to cooperate with fellow believers in experiments. And well, an interesting thing is that maybe this actually, this last result here maybe explained why it is that we evolved from scattered hunter-gatherers to large-scale society as we live in today, because these punishing gods or the beliefs in punishing gods may have solved free rider problems. So back in 10,000 years ago, we didn't have institutions to secure that I didn't steal from my neighbor. But if I believed in a God who punished me, maybe I wouldn't steal. And that would then explain how these large-scale societies could evolve without property rights institutions. All right, so let me just wrap up. How does religiosity influence economic growth? Well, it does so in different ways, depending on which dimensions of religion you look at. For instance, church attendance. So when going to church, you receive the religious doctrines of what to do and not to do and what to believe in, but you also get some social networking with fellow believers. You could also view religion as a worldview that both provides comfort to the individual when you are stressed, but which can also be incompatible with science. And so this is also reflected in the research that I showed you, that religious societies have lower innovation rates, are poorer on average, build on more traditional values, less educated, less democratic, but they're better able to cope with stress and are happier. And I didn't show you that research, but there's also research showing that they trust people more from their own religion. Yeah, so just to summarize the results in two figures. So lower growth, but higher happiness among believers. Maybe this is the take home. So previous research has focused mainly on the types of religion, which have mainly found that early on spreading religion could have been good for education. But if we look today on religiosity, well, religiosity seems to hamper the development of education and science. That's it.
All right, thank you very much, Janet. So that was very, very detailed research work on today's topic. We're very happy that you could share this insight with us. I have a couple of questions that I will ask, but of course, I'll also encourage our guests or audience to be able to send through their questions that they have, so that you can also address them as well. So, so my first question is, why does religion become the first point of call during social and economic strife? I know you mentioned about the research that you've seen with earthquake and all that. So why is that the case? Why is that religiosity or religion, becomes the first point of call in social economic strife for people?
Why religion is the first? Well, the research doesn't show whether religion is the first choice. So what I find in this research is that it's only in the most religious societies. So in the 80% most religious societies of the world, so that's most societies, people tend to become more religious when disaster hits. But in the least religious societies, which is, well, Denmark is among those, we don't see that religiosity increases. So here, people don't use religion as a coping strategy. So the point is that that you use the coping strategies that are most available to you. And if you have religion available to you, then you tend to use religion. Another result that is fun in that respect is that that, for example, the rise in religiosity after disasters is lower among married people. And the idea is that, well, married individuals, they also have their partner to cope emotionally with these events here. And I should stress that the earthquake study here, what was crucial in the study was that I was able to remove everything where there was a destruction. So I removed societies that were really destroyed by the earthquake, so I can look at those that were only emotionally affected by earthquakes. So of course, if your house is destroyed by the earthquake, you cope differently, I guess. You of course you cope by trying to survive and things like that, right? And the same we actually find with storms, for example, which here people don't tend to use religion because a storm is not an unpredictable event. A storm is quite practical. You need to get away from the storm if it's a dangerous one. And so in these cases here, we see that people use other coping strategies than religion.
So you may please end your screen share now so we can have the perfect.
Yes, great. Yeah, of course.
Perfect. So I have Dr. Azhar Hussein, who's associate professor at the University. I think he has a question. He raised his hand. So please, Prof, you may ask your question.
Yeah, I also want to, first of all, thank Dr. Janet for a very nice presentation. I was thinking about this effect on the economics regarding the religiosity. So I guess, as far as I know, most religions, they say that we should be good to each other and be nice in society and trust each other and all this stuff, right? And all of these things, trust and being social and take care of your neighbor and so on and so forth, that usually we say is a good thing for economics. So I think what I'm thinking about is, so is it religiosity nowadays negatively, too much religiosity negatively affecting economics, or is it misuse of religion, perhaps sometimes, which is causing a negative effect on the economics? So you have many societies in the South, maybe sometimes in the South, sometimes other places. I mean, officially very religious, but you know, the society doesn't really function that well. So I don't know if you get my point.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's a combination. So at the moment, I don't think the research knows which of these different channels it is. So but these research, it shows that it's both the misuse of religion, as you call it. That's well, the anti-democratic way effect of religion, and we actually see that. Yes, we see that in less functioning countries, but we actually also see it in the US. I've studied these laws in the US where there is a strong evangelical movement in the US, the Christian right, remember from Trump, but there you also see that people misuse religion for power purposes, and yes, so there it's not necessarily religiosity. So I'm using religiosity in a very broad term, right? So in these societies, it's not necessarily the religiosity of the population, but more, yeah, the strength of religion in society in general, because some people are misusing religion, and I think that is the one major effect of religiosity, but also this effect through education, that if you have societies where religion is extremely important and plays almost a larger role than science, we see that well, education tends to be lower and so on. So and that's not only in the less functioning societies. Again, we see the same in the US with these laws. We studied this laws that strengthen the role of religion in society, and we see actually there that the belief in science falls when laws strengthen religion in society. And I think that's the two main effects of religiosity, and why we see this negative correlation with income, democracy and education or science. Yeah.
All right, sure. Prof. Hussein, please, is that okay? You want to do a follow-up, or we should proceed?
Thank you. It's perfect.
Okay, perfect. Sure. So we have a question here from Karin Nyampong. So she's asking, would it be far-fetched to assume that religious nations are poorer because it does not promote risk-taking, in the sense that people need approval, or that it possibly accommodates corruption with axioms such as forgive your neighbor, etc.? So that's what she's asking, whether it would be far-fetched to assume that religious nations are poorer because it does not promote risk-taking, in the sense that people need approval, or that it possibly accommodates corruption with axioms such as forgive your neighbor, etc.
Okay, I'm actually missing some of the question. So whether
so she's asking whether it would be far-fetched to assume that religious nations are poorer, one, because it does not promote risk-taking, in the sense that people need approval or something, or it accommodates corruption, because there are a lot of phrases that goes like forgive this person for doing bad to you, or something of that sort. So is it that they are lazy in taking risk, or because of some of the teachings of forgive your neighbor, so they tend to accept wrongdoings, and they just leave it there? Is that why they are poor? Is that why they are religious while you are poor, or not? So that's what she's asking.
Yeah, so I can't answer like yes or no to that question. So it's but yes, there's also I find it plausible that this channel through risk taking or corruption may be part of the explanation. And if I so this idea of corruption, it's kind of similar to what we've been discussing about democracy. Like religion has this bad side, that you can misuse it, right? And yes, you can also misuse it. You can misuse it for either political power or corruption. So yes, I certainly think that is part of the explanation. And this idea of risk-taking, I don't know of any research yet on this idea of risk-taking, but I've heard the idea before, that maybe there's but it could go either way, whether you find too much risk-taking or too little risk-taking. But so actually, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, so there's a continuation. There's the second part of her question. So she's asking,
can I just ask? So because I can't, I would like to see it in the chat. Is it in the chat? This
in the Q&A. It's in the Q&A. Yeah. So the same down there, where you share the screen.
I have the chat open. Okay. So there we go. Okay, that makes it a little bit easier. Yeah.
All right. So the second part, she's asking, my second question, do with innovation. Yes. I think you mentioned already said that with the more religious, the lower the level of innovation in these areas, right? So she's asking, could it be, the case of Christian, Islamic, or this area we have what we call the eschatological kingdom of God, which is more of there's a better place, heaven, where things out there, I'm a Christian, so I know what she's referring to. So she's asking, could that be a reason why your research showed that in the more religious areas there's a bit of lack of innovation, or innovation is not that high? Could that be an issue?
Yeah, that's also a really nice point she has there. Yeah, I think that could actually also explain some of this negative correlation with innovation. The thing is, in that paper that I showed you with the innovation, it's mainly a correlation in the empirics. And so the strong part in that paper is the theoretical model. But so this point you have here could also explain the negative correlation with innovation. That so I guess what you are after is that if you have some beliefs where you anyway can go to a better place at some point, which is outside of this world, you don't really need to engage in these intense innovation and so on. And that was actually also what Max Weber talked a little bit about. That he said that so his idea was that Protestantism came, and in Protestantism you could gain access to this better place if you worked hard in the present life, and therefore we might see that more Protestant areas, they were more likely to go through to go through capitalism and become richer than for example Catholic areas, where you didn't increase your likelihood of going to heaven if you worked hard on earth. So that was actually very much what Weber talked about, but what we are talking about is more general, right? That it's actually a part of most of the major religions that you go to some better place after death. But yeah, so the idea is cool, and I don't know of any empirical research on it yet.
Yes. So before we ask the next question, so we have Omar who are joining to speak. So Omar, please, you may ask your question.
Yes, hello. My question is just in the form of contribution.
Okay.
You know, Mr. Frimpong, you will bear with me that in Africa, I will not say in Ghana, in Africa, religion is one, let me say the religious body in Africa are the most lucrative and the most vibrant and the most economical benefits, even in most of the industries in Africa. Mr. Paul will bear with me, even in the media sector, the religious body, they take over. So you can see how the economic religious are we in Africa. I will not put the content in the world, but I'm basically in Africa. And due to the fact that both, let me say, the traditional religion, the Islam and the Christians are now springing up to develop a certain way of business. When you look at their business, it's more than even the industry and a lot of commercials that we have. So religion in Africa, I will look at the content of the submission, your submission concerning the religious, because the economic aspect of religion in Africa is very, very booming, very, very booming. So it's up to us to understand the religion and economic. And most of our leaders, they don't distinguish the two. So because of the powerful religious in our contents, it become a venture, it become a business because of they have influence. Any politician, any lawmaker, you want to venture a religious leader, you lose your position. In Africa, I'm not looking at Ghana. When you attack so-called man of God, the next moment he will speak on his platform against you. So when they request fundraising or putting out oil or water to people to purchase, within short time, they will not do any marketing. They will not do any advert on that oil or water or any book. People will buy it to the extent that even you, the producer, or you, the manufacturer, who do a lot of businesses, will lose a lot of your business. Yeah. So in Africa, religion is very, very powerful. Yeah. Mr. Frimpong will bear with me. So that's why I'm going to make a submission.
Your point is well made. I think I'll connect this to, I think, my question that I wanted to ask. So I wanted to ask Janet, so here we're looking at how far does religion influence the outcome of an election, and what bearing does it have on the economic outlook of such a country? And I think Omar was trying to give an example, like in countries in Africa, where religious leaders, I think even in part of your submission, the study in Italy, you mentioned that when there is an issue about a disaster, the leaders, democracy, linking it to democracy, where they become more powerful. So here we have that level of influence of religious leaders, which obviously, in most cases, also has, a bearing on election, outcome, and this, feeds into the democracy that we are doing. So how does that, fit in terms of religion, election, democracy, and the, general outlook of such an economy?
Yes, so let me just recap, so I'm sure that we're talking about the same. So so this idea that it's a benefit for a leader to flag his or her religion, right? That's so both leaders of industry or politics, it's good and powerful to have to say I'm religious or I have this and this religion, right?
Right.
Yeah. And not to take it away from Africa, but I'm just saying that it's the same in the US. Huh? That's all, and it's very, and there is a huge difference between, well, Africa and Europe, for example, or Europe and the US in this respect, because, at least in Northern Europe, it's bad for a leader to flag his or her religion. Huh? We say, oh, but if you talk about religion, I'm not sure whether you can be objective and focus on your politics or leading your company and so on. So and I really find this topic so extremely interesting that what is it? Why is it good in some societies to say that? Of course, it's good in some societies in Africa because you have much higher religiosity than for example we do in Denmark. So of course, if you want to speak to the majority of the population, and the majority population is religious, well, then you can use religion to influence, right? But in Denmark, where the majority is not religious, it's not a good strategy to use religion. So I guess it's also about, that you use the tools to attract the most people, to convince the most people, but there is also another dimension of it, because and I don't know if it's different in Africa and the US here, because the leader would use religion if the most people are religious, but in the US there is another dimension, which is that there is a powerful group of politically powerful individuals, the evangelicals or the Christian right, and they are not necessarily reflecting the population. They are just powerful people in the top of society that are very influential in politics and so on, and they're extremely religious. And there the politicians actually also, I think, speak more about religion to satisfy the powerful evangelicals, which are not in the population. So there it's a little bit different, and I don't know how it is in Africa, whether it's because there's some very powerful people who are very religious and want the leaders to talk about religion, or whether it's just to satisfy the majority of the population.
I think it's mostly the case of satisfying the majority of the population.
Yeah.
Religious, yeah. So I have a question here from Subamde. It's in the Q&A. I think that's the last question we have there. Please, if you have questions, you can still send them through so that we can wrap this conversation up. So he's asking, are there any exceptions where the economies of certain states or region has developed despite having strong sentiments on religious dependency other than the Middle East? Because most of the Christian societies are somewhat more developed than others. Is there any connection between this, or it's just coincidence that this happened? I don't know if you get a question, but is there maybe? Yeah.
So I, for sure, there's some of the more developed societies that are still very religious. For example, again, I'm sorry, but the US, it's actually quite a bit of an outlier in this relation. So the US is actually, if you saw in the figure, it's outside of the correlation here. The US is extremely religious, but extremely rich also. So yes, there are exceptions. But another point is also that if we go back in history, we were all extremely religious, and well, everybody believed in God, but at some point, and maybe those that were more religious, they were earlier to develop into modern societies. This is still just theories because it's extremely difficult to get data back then, but the idea about, well, having a punishing God that solves free riding problems and actually makes it less likely for cheating and corruption and so on, if we go back in time. So the idea would then be that some societies that were extremely religious, and that's actually also Denmark, that was extremely religious back in time, they emerged into big societies earlier than less religious societies, or at least than societies that didn't have the punishing gods. So 12,000 years ago, we all just had beliefs in spirits and spirits that didn't harm people. But then at a certain point in time, around the same time that agriculture emerged, around 12,000 years ago, we saw these big gods evolving, punishing gods. And they may have been good for growth in history, until the point in time where knowledge, education, and science became important. Yeah, but this is big ideas and probable ideas, not, yeah.
Okay. All right, so I think that will be the last question that we had. Let me see if I can have one question here to ask lastly. I think my two questions have been asked. So is there anyone who has any questions? Otherwise, we'll wrap it up to today's conversation. So if there's none, Janet, I'll give you the opportunity to say your last few words and then we can wrap it up. Yeah.
Yes, well, thank you very much. And it was fun to talk to you. And please email me if you have any more questions or just comments or like to discuss. I'd be happy to discuss.
Sure. Thank you very much to Dr. Janet Benson, who is Associate Professor of Economies at the Copenhagen in Denmark. Thank you very much for sharing your insights with us today on the economies of religion. To all of you joining us today, we say a very big thank you to you from the ICC, the Institute of Certified Chartered Economists. I think earlier I put in our links that you can visit our page and have access to certain information that you would like to have access to. And we have other webinars that are coming up. So on October 14th, we have what we call Mergers and Acquisitions webinar covering Asia Pacific. We have another webinar on income inequality, which will be, of course, presented by our very own Dr. Asar Hussein, who spoke earlier on this call, who is an Associate Professor of Economics at the Rosedale University in Denmark. So you may visit our website, www.charteredeconomist.org, and there you can have access to all these events that we are offering for free, and then you can be part of it. So once again, thank you for being part of today's conversation. We'll come your way again soon. Bye-bye.